In the shadowy underworld of supernatural politics, Lyra Chen believed she had found her destined mate in Damian Blackwood, the powerful vampire lord who ruled the East Coast covens with an iron fist. For months, she served loyally in his inner circle, convinced their connection was real. But when the ancient mating ceremony arrived, Damian's cruel rejection shattered her world and her understanding of her own identity. Cast out and humiliated, Lyra discovers she's not just another supernatural being, but a rare hybrid with bloodlines that could shift the balance of power forever. When Kieran Nightfall, the fierce alpha king of the northwestern werewolf territories, arrives seeking alliance, he recognizes what Damian failed to see. As old rivalries ignite and a supernatural war threatens to consume everything, Lyra must choose between the safety of hiding her true nature and embracing a destiny that could either save or destroy both vampire and werewolf kingdoms. The crystal chandelier cast fractured shadows across the marble floor of the Blackwood Manor's grand ballroom, each shard of light seeming to mock Lyra Chen as she stood frozen in the center of the ancient ceremony circle. The weight of hundreds of vampire eyes pressed against her skin like ice, their collective silence more deafening than any scream could have been. She could feel Damian's presence behind her, his power radiating through the ornate chamber like a living thing, dark and suffocating. For 6 months she had served at his side, knowing that the pull between them was real. The way his eyes would linger on her during council meetings, the protective way he positioned himself when other supernatural dignitaries visited, the electricity that sparked whenever their hands accidentally touched during the endless political negotiations that defined vampire society. All of it had led to this moment, the solstice claiming, when mates were formally bound before the ancient covens. Lyra had prepared for weeks, studying the old rituals, learning the ceremonial responses, imagining how it would feel to finally belong somewhere, to someone, completely. "Turn and face me." Damian's voice cut through the silence, cold and commanding in a way that made her stomach clench with sudden dread. Lyra turned slowly, her midnight blue gown, chosen specifically because Damian had once mentioned how the color brought out the unusual violet flecks in her dark eyes, rustling against the ceremonial stones. When she met his gaze, the bottom fell out of her world. There was nothing there. No warmth, no recognition of their connection, no trace of the man who had held her close during the attack on the Portland Coven just 3 weeks ago, whispering fierce promises against her hair about keeping her safe. "You have served the Eastern Covens with adequate loyalty," Damian began, his words formal and distant, as if she were a stranger receiving a commendation rather than the woman he was supposed to claim as his eternal mate. "However, the position you seek requires more than service. It requires blood purity that you simply do not possess." The words hit her like physical blows. Around the ballroom, she could hear the sharp intakes of breath from the assembled vampires, the rustle of expensive fabrics as they shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how these ceremonies went. Rejections happened, but privately, quietly, with dignity preserved for all involved. "I don't understand," Lyra managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel her hands beginning to tremble and pressed them firmly against her sides, refusing to show weakness in front of the coven leaders who had never fully accepted her anyway. Damian stepped closer, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Regret, maybe, or pain, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Your bloodline is complicated," he continued, his tone growing colder with each word. "Recent investigations have revealed inconsistencies in your heritage that make you unsuitable for the role of vampire queen. You carry traces of other influences that would compromise the purity of our lineage." Other influences. The phrase sent ice through her veins. She had always known there was something different about her, something that set her apart from the pureblood vampires who made up Damian's inner circle. Her unusual strength, the way she could sense things others missed, the strange dreams that felt more like memories of lives she'd never lived. "What are you saying?" she asked, though part of her already knew, had always known, deep down where she kept her most frightening truths locked away. "I'm saying that you are not what you believe yourself to be, Lyra Chen, and I cannot, will not, bind myself to something so uncertain." The word dripped with distaste, as if her very existence was offensive to him. The rejection hit her in waves. First came the humiliation, the knowledge that every vampire in the room was witnessing her public dismissal, that by tomorrow the story would spread through every supernatural community on the continent. Then came the deeper pain, the shattering of 6 months of carefully built hopes and dreams, the destruction of what she had believed was genuine connection and love. But underneath it all, threading through the devastation like poison, came something else. Anger. Clean, bright, and absolutely furious. "So that's it?" she asked, lifting her chin and meeting his eyes directly, letting every ounce of that rising fury show in her voice. 6 months of service, of loyalty, of believing that what we had was real, and you dismiss me like a servant who broke a glass? Something dangerous flashed across Damien's features. "You forget yourself, you forget your place." "My place?" Lyra laughed, the sound harsh and broken in the vast space. "My place was supposed to be beside you. My place was supposed to be as your equal, your partner. But I suppose that was never really an option for someone with uncertain bloodlines." She could feel power beginning to build around her, responding to her emotional state in a way that had never happened before. The air in the ballroom grew thick and electric, and several of the younger vampires took involuntary steps backward. Even Damien's eyes widened slightly, though he quickly masked his surprise. "You will control yourself," he commanded, his own power rising to meet hers, the two forces creating a pressure that made the crystal chandelier above them chime ominously. "Or what?" Lyra challenged, taking a step forward instead of back, letting whatever was building inside her rise to the surface. "You'll reject me twice? You'll humiliate me further? I think you've done quite enough damage for one evening, my lord." The title came out mocking, bitter, and she saw his jaw clench in response. "Guards," Damien called, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of leadership. "Please escort Miss Chen from the premises. Her invitation to remain in Blackwood Manor is hereby revoked." 4 vampire guards moved forward, their faces carefully neutral, but their hands resting on the ceremonial weapons at their sides. Lyra looked at each of them. Marcus, who had taught her to fight with daggers; Elena, who had helped her navigate the complex social hierarchies of vampire society; David, who had shared stories of the old country during long nights of guard duty; and Thomas, barely past his first century, who had looked up to her like an older sister. None of them met her eyes. "That won't be necessary," Lyra said quietly, pulling what remained of her dignity around herself like armor. "I can see myself out." She turned toward the ballroom's main entrance, her spine straight and her head high, even as she felt pieces of her heart scattered across the marble floor behind her. But as she reached the massive oak doors, Damien's voice stopped her one final time. "Lyra." When she looked back, his expression was unreadable, but his next words cut deeper than anything that had come before. "For what it's worth, this truly is for the best. You'll understand someday." She didn't trust herself to speak, so she simply pushed through the doors and walked out of the only life she had known for the past 2 years, out of the only place that had ever felt like home, out of the arms of the man she had loved with everything she had. The autumn air outside was sharp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom, but it did nothing to ease the burning in her chest or the way her entire world felt like it was crumbling around her. She made it halfway down the long driveway before her legs gave out, and she sank onto a stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree, finally allowing the tears she had held back to fall. As she sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the familiar grounds that were no longer her sanctuary, Lyra Chen had no idea that her rejection was about to set in motion events that would shake the supernatural world to its foundations. She had no idea that her unusual heritage, the very thing that had made Damien cast her aside, would soon make her the most sought-after prize in a war that was already brewing. All she knew was that the man she had loved had looked at her like she was nothing, and for the first time in her life she was completely, utterly alone. 3 days after the rejection, Lyra found herself in the last place she ever expected to be, sitting across from Dr. Miranda Santos in a cramped office above a 24-hour diner in Portland's supernatural district, staring at test results that made no sense. She hadn't planned to seek answers. After leaving Blackwood Manor with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small savings account she'd maintained independently, Lyra had intended to disappear entirely, maybe head south to California or west to Seattle, anywhere that the Blackwood name held no power, and she could start over as just another supernatural trying to make it in the human world. But the dreams had started immediately, vivid, overwhelming visions that felt more real than her waking hours. In them, she ran through ancient forests under a full moon, her senses sharp and wild in ways that had nothing to do with her vampire nature. She could smell things that shouldn't exist, pack bonds, territorial markers, the complex emotional signatures that werewolves used to communicate. And always, there was a voice calling to her across vast distances, deep and commanding and utterly foreign. Dr. Santos, a witch who specialized in supernatural genealogy and worked with the Portland Paranormal Registry, had been recommended by the elderly vampire who ran the boarding house where Lyra was staying. Sometimes, the old woman had said gently, we need to understand what we are before we can figure out where we belong. I've run the test 3 times, Dr. Santos said now, her dark eyes troubled as she spread the papers across her cluttered desk. The results are unprecedented. Lyra wrapped her hands around the paper coffee cup she'd been nursing for the past hour, drawing comfort from its warmth. Just tell me, whatever it is, it can't be worse than what I'm imagining. You're not a pure vampire, Lyra. In fact, you're barely vampire at all. Doctor. Santos picked up the first sheet, pointing to a complex diagram that looked like a family tree designed by someone having a fever dream. Your supernatural heritage is trifold, roughly 30% vampire, which explains your enhanced strength and night vision, 20% witch, which accounts for the power surges you've been experiencing since the rejection. Emotional trauma often triggers latent magical abilities. Lyra's cup trembled in her hands. And the other 50%? Werewolf. Specifically, alpha werewolf bloodline. Dr. Santos leaned back in her chair, studying Lyra's reaction carefully. Not just any alpha line either. The genetic markers suggest direct descent from one of the original packs, the founding families that established territorial boundaries across North America centuries ago. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Lyra set down her coffee with shaking hands, afraid she might drop it. That's impossible. I was raised vampire. I've lived vampire. I don't shift. I don't have pack bonds. I've never even felt the pull of the moon. That's because your vampire heritage has been dominant your entire life, Dr. Santos explained patiently. But rejection from a presumed mate, especially a rejection as public and emotionally traumatic as yours, can trigger dormant genetics. Your body is essentially rewriting its own supernatural blueprint. As if summoned by her words, Lyra felt something stir deep in her chest. A restlessness she'd been attributing to heartbreak suddenly felt more primal, more urgent. The need to move, to run, to find something or someone that would ease the growing ache in her bones. The dreams, she whispered. The voices calling to me. Dr. Santos nodded grimly. Your alpha heritage recognizing other alphas. Lyra, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound dramatic, but you need to understand the implications. You're not just any hybrid. You're what the old texts call a triarch. 3 bloodlines converging in one person. It's happened maybe a dozen times in recorded supernatural history. And what happened to the others? The witch's expression darkened. They became the most powerful supernatural beings of their generations. They also became targets for every faction looking to claim or control that power. Most didn't live to see their 100th birthday. Before Lyra could process this terrifying revelation, the small window behind Dr. Santos exploded inward in a shower of glass and wood. Dark shapes poured through the opening. Vampires moving with the deadly grace and coordinated precision of Damien's elite guard. Found you, Marcus growled as he landed in a crouch among the scattered papers and broken glass. The vampire who had once been her friend now looked at her with cold calculation. Lord Blackwood requires your immediate return. Lyra shot to her feet, power flooding through her system in a way that felt different than it ever had before. Stronger, wilder, more alive. I don't serve Lord Blackwood anymore. He made that abundantly clear. You serve the greater good of supernatural stability, Elena said as she moved to flank Marcus, her hand resting on a silver-edged blade. Your condition has been reported to the High Council. They've declared you a Category 5 supernatural anomaly. You're too dangerous to roam freely. Dr. Santos was backing toward a door that Lyra hoped led to an escape route, her hands weaving protective wards in the air. Lyra, you need to go. Now. They can't be allowed to take you back to Damien. Why? Lyra demanded, even as she prepared to fight her way out. What aren't you telling me? Because if they can control you, study you, they can replicate the process, the witch said urgently. They can create an army of triarchs loyal only to the vampire covens. The balance between supernatural species would be destroyed forever. Marcus lunged forward, but Lyra was already moving, her newly awakened heritage making her faster and more agile than she'd ever been. She grabbed the heavy desk and hurled it across the small room with strength that surprised even her, buying them precious seconds as the vampires dodged the improvised weapon. This way, Doctor. Santos yanked open what looked like a supply closet but revealed a narrow staircase leading down. The tunnels connect to the werewolf territory. They can't follow you there without starting a war. Lyra hesitated at the threshold. Cross into werewolf lands, and there would be no going back. She would be making a choice that put her permanently beyond Damien's reach, but also beyond any chance of the life she had planned and dreamed of. Behind her, she could hear more vampires arriving, their voices coordinating an attack pattern that would have her surrounded in moments. "Lyra Chen," Marcus called, his voice carrying the formal authority of a coven command. "By order of Lord Blackwood and the High Council, you will submit to escort and evaluation. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." She looked back at the vampires who had once been her friends, her family, her entire world. They stared at her now like she was a rabid animal that needed to be caged for everyone's safety. Even Elena, who had braided her hair before formal dinners and taught her the old vampire lullabies, held her weapon with the steady grip of someone prepared to use it. "I'm sorry," Lyra said quietly, meaning it more than they would ever know. Then she plunged into the darkness of the stairwell, Dr. Santos close behind her, the sound of pursuit echoing off the narrow walls. The tunnels beneath Portland were older than the city above, carved by supernatural communities who had needed hidden pathways long before humans had dreamed of underground transit systems. As they ran through the dimly lit passages, Dr. Santos pressed something into Lyra's hand, a small warm stone that pulsed with its own inner light. "Communication charm," the witch panted as they navigated a particularly steep section. "If you need help, if you need answers, hold it and call my name. But Lyra, once you cross into werewolf territory, everything changes. They'll sense what you are immediately. Some will see you as a gift from the moon goddess herself. Others will see you as an abomination that threatens pack purity. Be careful who you trust." Above them, Lyra could hear the vampires entering the tunnels, their enhanced senses tracking her scent through the maze of stone corridors. But ahead, she could smell something else: pine and snow, and the wild, untamed scent of werewolf territory. As they reached a heavy iron door marked with territorial warnings in multiple supernatural languages, Dr. Santos stopped. "This is as far as I can go," she said, pressing a small bag into Lyra's other hand. "Food, money, and a letter of introduction to someone who might be able to help you. Remember, you're not just running from Damien anymore. Every supernatural faction is going to want to claim you, study you, or eliminate you. Trust your instincts. They're stronger now." Lyra nodded, hefting the bag and tucking the communication stone into her jacket pocket. As she reached for the door handle, a thought occurred to her. "Dr. Santos, if this part of my heritage has been dormant my whole life, why is it awakening now? Why not when I first became an adult or when I experienced other trauma?" The witch's expression grew solemn. "Because somewhere out there, your true mate is calling to you, and he's strong enough to wake up every sleeping part of your soul. If this part also touched your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this story." The werewolf territory beyond the iron door was nothing like what Lyra had expected. Instead of finding herself in the deep wilderness she'd imagined, she emerged into what appeared to be a sophisticated underground complex, all polished stone and modern lighting, with the kind of technological infrastructure that rivaled anything in Damien's manor. The scent hit her immediately. Dozens of werewolves, their individual signatures creating a complex tapestry of pack bonds, hierarchies, and emotions that her newly awakened senses could read like an open book. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the low rumble of conversation, the clatter of what might be a communal dining area, and underneath it all, the steady thrum of generators powering this hidden city. Well, what have we here?" Lyra spun toward the voice, her body automatically dropping into a defensive crouch as a figure emerged from the shadows. The werewolf was tall and lean, with the kind of casual confidence that spoke of high pack ranking, but it was his eyes that made her breath catch, golden amber that seemed to look right through her, cataloging every secret she'd ever tried to hide. "You're not exactly what we expected," he continued, circling her slowly, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air around her. "The vampire's trail led us to believe we'd be dealing with a simple refugee situation. But you're something else entirely." "I'm not looking for trouble," Lyra said carefully, keeping her hands visible but ready to move. "I just need safe passage through your territory." The werewolf laughed, the sound holding genuine amusement rather than mockery. "Safe passage? Lady, you just brought a diplomatic incident right to our front door. Half the vampire covens on the East Coast are mobilizing to find you, and the other half are pretending they've never heard your name. That kind of attention doesn't usually come with simple passage requests." Before Lyra could respond, the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees. The werewolf who had been questioning her immediately stepped back, his casual demeanor replaced by rigid attention as footsteps echoed from deeper in the complex. When Kieran Nightfall emerged from the shadows, Lyra understood why her dreams had been filled with commanding voices calling across impossible distances. He was tall, taller than Damien, broader across the shoulders with the kind of presence that made the spacious corridor feel suddenly cramped. His dark hair was longer than current fashion dictated, pulled back in a way that revealed the strong line of his jaw and the intricate tattoos that covered his throat and disappeared beneath his black shirt. But it was his eyes that held her captive, silver blue like storm clouds, ancient and knowing in a way that spoke of power accumulated over centuries. More than that, though, was the way every cell in her body seemed to recognize him. The restlessness that had been building since her rejection, the dreams, the sense of something calling to her, all of it crystallized into sharp, undeniable certainty as their gazes met. Mate. The word rang through her mind with such force that she actually staggered, one hand reaching out to steady herself against the stone wall. From the way Kieran's eyes widened, then narrowed with predatory focus, she knew he felt it too. "Connor," Kieran said without looking away from Lyra, his voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that made the other werewolf immediately step back. "Clear the corridor, now. Alpha, the security protocols, now." Connor disappeared so quickly he might have been a ghost, leaving Lyra alone with the most dangerous werewolf on the continent, who was looking at her like she was either a miracle or a catastrophe he hadn't decided how to handle yet. "You're her," he said quietly, taking a step closer. "The vampire Lord Blackwood rejected, the one causing all the political chaos." "I'm not a vampire," Lyra found herself saying, the truth spilling out before she could think better of it. "Not entirely. I'm complicated. Triarch." The word was barely a whisper, but it hit like a physical blow. "Jesus Christ, you're a triarch." He moved then, faster than even her enhanced reflexes could track, backing her against the stone wall with his hands braced on either side of her head. This close, she could see the gold flecks in his silver eyes, could smell cedar and snow, and something wild that made her want to bare her throat in submission, a reaction that would have horrified her a week ago. "Do you have any idea what you are?" he asked, his voice rough with something between awe and anger. "Do you understand what your very existence means for every supernatural community in North America?" "I'm beginning to get the picture," Lyra managed, fighting to keep her breathing steady despite the way his proximity was affecting her. "Everyone either wants to control me, study me, or kill me. It's been a really enlightening few days." Kieran's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Control you? Lady, you could level a city block if you fully came into your power. Study you? Every supernatural faction is going to want to figure out how to create more like you. And kill you?" His expression grew deadly serious. "That's going to be the winning option for most of them." "Comforting," Lyra said dryly, then caught herself staring at his mouth and forced her attention back to his eyes. "So, what's your plan? Hand me over to the highest bidder?" "My plan," Kieran said, leaning even closer, "is to figure out why the moon goddess saw fit to make my mate the most politically dangerous supernatural being alive." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Lyra's heart race. Mate, not the careful political alliance that her relationship with Damien had been building toward, but the primal, unbreakable bond that werewolves built their entire society around. "I can't be your mate," she said weakly, even as every instinct she possessed screamed the opposite. "I was supposed to be bound to someone else. I'm not even properly werewolf. I'm some kind of genetic anomaly that everyone wants to either worship or destroy. You think I give a damn about genetics?" Kieran's voice dropped to a growl that vibrated through her chest. "You think I care what the other factions want? You're mine, Lyra Chen. You've been mine since the moment you walked through that door and probably long before that." Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the complex, red lights flashing in patterns that clearly meant emergency. Connor's voice crackled through an intercom system, tense with barely controlled panic. "Alpha, we have a problem. Vampire forces have surrounded the main entrances. They're demanding the return of their property under the terms of the Geneva Accords." Kieran stepped back, his expression shifting from possessive mate to Alpha King in an instant. "How many?" 60 confirmed, probably more in reserve. "Lord Blackwood is leading them personally." Lyra felt ice flood her veins. Damien was here with enough vampires to start a small war, demanding her return. She looked up at Kieran, expecting to see calculation in his eyes, maybe regret at the complications she was bringing to his pack. Instead, she saw fury so cold and absolute that it took her breath away. "Connor," Kieran said into the intercom, his voice carrying across the complex with supernatural power. "Send word to every pack in the Pacific Northwest. Tell them the Alpha King is calling in alliance debts. Tell them vampires have invaded werewolf sovereign territory and threatened my mate." "Kieran, no," Lyra said urgently, grabbing his arm. "You don't understand. I'm not worth starting a war over. There are treaties, agreements. You're worth everything," he cut her off, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "And those treaties? They don't apply when vampires invade our lands making demands. Blackwood just gave me legal justification for something I've wanted to do for centuries." The intercom crackled again. "Alpha, Lord Blackwood is requesting formal parley. He wants to discuss terms." Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "Tell Lord Blackwood that the Northwestern Territories are happy to receive him under guest protection laws. Tell him to come alone, unarmed, and prepared to explain why he thinks he has any claim on my mate." As werewolves began moving through the corridors with military precision, preparing for either negotiation or war, Kieran turned back to Lyra. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "you need to know that this changes everything. Not just for us, but for every supernatural community on the continent. The vampire-werewolf Cold War that's been brewing for decades, it just went hot. What comes next is even stronger. And to not miss the ending, tap the subscribe button now. It's free and you'll be with me in every new story." The Great Hall of the werewolf complex had been transformed into a war room within hours. Ancient banners bearing the symbols of allied packs hung from the vaulted ceiling, while modern communication equipment hummed quietly along the walls, keeping Kieran connected to werewolf territories across 3 states. The message had gone out on every supernatural frequency. The Alpha King was preparing for conflict, and old alliances were being called to account. Lyra stood at Kieran's side, wearing clothes that Connor's mate had provided. Dark jeans, boots, and a deep green sweater that brought out the unusual violet flecks in her eyes that had once caught Damien's attention. Now those same eyes were focused on the massive oak doors at the far end of the hall, knowing that any moment the man who had shattered her world would walk through them. "You don't have to be here for this," Kieran said quietly, his hand finding hers with casual possessiveness that still sent electricity racing through her system. "I can handle Blackwood." "No," Lyra replied firmly, squeezing his fingers. "This started because he rejected me in front of his entire coven. If we're going to end it, I need to be part of that ending." The doors opened with ceremonial precision, and Damien Blackwood entered flanked by 2 of his lieutenants. Not the guards who had tried to capture her, but older vampires, council members whose presence spoke to the seriousness of this diplomatic encounter. Damien himself looked exactly as she remembered, tall, elegant, radiating the kind of controlled power that had first attracted her to him. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his expression carefully neutral, but Lyra could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes immediately sought her out across the room. When their gazes met, she felt nothing. No spark, no connection, no echo of the bond she had believed they shared. Whatever had existed between them, real or imagined, had been severed completely by his public rejection. "Lord Blackwood," Kieran said formally, inclining his head with exactly the minimum courtesy required by supernatural law. "Welcome to the Northwestern Territories. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Alpha King Nightfall," Damien replied, his own nod equally measured. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding one of our former associates." The casual dismissal in his tone, "former associates," sent a spike of anger through Lyra. But before she could respond, Kieran's power filled the room like a living thing, pressing against every surface until the air itself felt heavy and charged. "Misunderstanding?" Kieran's voice carried the kind of deadly calm that made experienced supernatural beings very nervous. "You invaded werewolf sovereign territory with an armed force, demanding the return of what you called your property. Which part of that was misunderstood?" "The woman beside you was under vampire protection and covenant law," one of Damien's lieutenants interjected, stepping slightly forward. "Her departure from our territory was irregular. We simply seek her return for proper debriefing and transition." "The woman beside me," Kieran said, his arm moving to encircle Lyra's waist with unmistakable possessiveness, "is my mate. She is under werewolf protection now, and covenant law has no authority over werewolf-bonded pairs." Damien's carefully controlled expression flickered, something sharp and almost pained crossing his features before he mastered it. "Alpha King, I believe you may not fully understand Miss Chen's unique circumstances. She is not entirely werewolf. Her heritage makes her unsuitable for traditional pack bonds. Are you questioning my ability to recognize my own mate? Kieran's voice dropped to a growl that made Lyra's pulse spike and caused both of Damien's lieutenants to take involuntary steps backward. I'm questioning whether she has been entirely honest with you about what she is, Damien replied coolly, though Lyra caught the slight tremor in his hands that suggested his composure cost him more effort than he wanted to show. Lyra Chen is a triarch, part vampire, part witch, part werewolf. She is potentially the most powerful supernatural being born in centuries. She is also completely untrained and unstable. The danger she represents, the danger I represent, Lyra interrupted, stepping forward and breaking her silence, seems to be the only thing anyone cares about anymore. Not who I am, not what I want, just what I might become if you can't control me. Damien's eyes fixed on her, and for a moment, she saw an echo of the man she had believed she loved. Lyra, you don't understand the forces at play here. The vampire covens, the witch councils, even some of the werewolf packs. They're all mobilizing. Some want to harness your power. Others want to eliminate the threat you represent. The safest place for you is with the people who cast me out and humiliated me in front of their entire court. Lyra's voice rose, years of suppressed anger finally finding release. The safest place for me is with the man who looked me in the eye and told me I was unsuitable, uncertain, not pure enough for his precious bloodline. That rejection was necessary, Damien said urgently, taking a step toward her despite the warning growl that emanated from Kieran. If I had claimed you, bound you to the vampire covens, you would have become a weapon in their hands, a political tool to be used against every other supernatural faction. I was trying to protect you. The words hit like physical blows, reframing everything she thought she understood about that terrible night. Protect me? You protected me by destroying me in front of everyone we knew? Yes, Damien said simply, and the raw honesty in his voice made her stumble backward against Kieran's solid presence. Because as long as you were mine, you were theirs. As long as you wore my mark, carried my claim, you would never be free to discover what you really are, what you're really capable of. Kieran's arms tightened around her as she struggled to process this revelation. So your grand gesture of protection was to shatter her publicly and send her running into the night with no explanation, no support, no understanding of what she was becoming. I didn't know she was this close to awakening, Damien admitted, his composure finally cracking. I thought I had more time to handle the transition carefully, to prepare proper protections for her. When Connor's scouts reported a triarch had crossed into werewolf territory, I realized how badly I had miscalculated. You realized, Lyra said, her voice shaking with fury, that your property had wandered off and might be claimed by someone else. You were never property, Damien snapped, his own anger finally showing. You are the most important thing in my world. Do you think that rejection didn't destroy me too? Do you think I haven't spent every moment since then knowing I made the worst mistake of my existence? The confession hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Around them, Lyra could sense the werewolf guards tensing, ready for violence if the emotional undercurrents in the room spilled over into physical conflict. But you did it anyway, she said quietly. You made that choice for both of us without consulting me, without trusting me to handle the consequences. Because the consequences could have been your death, Damien said desperately. Because vampire politics would have consumed you, used you, destroyed everything beautiful and strong about who you are. Because I love you too much to watch that happen. The words should have meant everything. A month ago, they would have been exactly what she needed to hear. But standing in Kieran's arms, feeling the absolute certainty of their bond, understanding for the first time what it meant to be truly accepted and claimed without reservation, Damien's declaration felt like an echo from another life. Love isn't making decisions for someone, she said finally. Love is standing beside them while they make their own choices, even when those choices terrify you. Love is trust and partnership and believing that together you're stronger than anything the world can throw at you. She turned in Kieran's arms, meeting his silver blue eyes with complete certainty. I choose the Northwestern Territories. I choose the Werewolf Alliance. I choose you. The bond that snapped into place between them was visible, a golden thread of power that made every werewolf in the room howl in recognition and sent Damien staggering backward as if he'd been physically struck. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free and it helps me keep sharing these intense moments with you. The moment Lyra's choice crystallized into the mate bond, everything changed. Power exploded outward from where she and Kieran stood. washing over the assembled werewolves in waves of golden light that made them drop to one knee in instinctive submission to their new Luna. The ancient stones of the hall itself seemed to resonate with the energy, humming with harmonics that spoke of magic older than any supernatural treaty or political alliance. But it was Damien's reaction that stopped Lyra's heart. The vampire lord, who had maintained perfect composure through centuries of political intrigue and supernatural warfare, doubled over as if he'd been run through with a blade. The sound that tore from his throat was raw and broken, the cry of something dying. When he straightened, his dark eyes were wild with an anguish so profound that even Kieran's protective growl faltered. "You don't understand what you've just done," Damien gasped, his perfect facade cracking completely. "The mate bond between werewolves. It's permanent, unbreakable. But Lyra, your vampire heritage, there was still a connection between us. Dormant, but real. By fully bonding with him, you've just severed every tie to your vampire nature." Lyra felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation like part of her soul being carved away. The vampire abilities she'd lived with her entire life, the enhanced night vision, the supernatural grace, the connection to the ancient covens, all of it was retreating, leaving hollow spaces that filled immediately with something wilder and more primal. "The awakening," she whispered, understanding flooding through her as her werewolf heritage surged to fill the vacuum. "This is what triggers the full transformation." Kieran's arms tightened around her as her body began to change, not physically but energetically, every cell realigning itself to accommodate the shift in her supernatural nature. She could feel his strength flowing into her through their new bond, steadying her as power unlike anything she'd ever experienced coursed through her system. "Connor," Kieran barked, his voice carrying absolute authority even as he supported Lyra through the overwhelming transition. "Medical team now, and get Dr. Santos on the emergency line. We need her expertise." But even as werewolves scattered to follow his orders, Lyra knew with growing certainty that no medical team would be able to help with what was happening to her. This wasn't illness or injury, it was evolution, her supernatural DNA rewriting itself in real time. "The witch heritage," she managed through gritted teeth as another wave of transformation washed over her. "It's not retreating, it's adapting." Indeed, while her vampire abilities were fading, the magical aspects of her nature seemed to be intensifying, combining with her awakening werewolf instincts in ways that created entirely new capabilities. She could sense the emotional states of every person in the room, as clearly as if they were speaking their feelings aloud. More than that, she could feel the connections between them. Pack bonds, family ties, old loyalties, and newer alliances, like a complex web of light and shadow overlaying her normal vision. "Impossible," one of Damien's lieutenants breathed, his voice filled with equal parts awe and terror. "She's not losing power, she's concentrating it. The vampire heritage isn't being destroyed, it's being absorbed into the other bloodlines." Damien stumbled forward, reaching toward her with desperate urgency. "Lyra, listen to me. What you're becoming. There are no safeguards, no precedents. The original Triarchs who underwent this kind of transformation, they all went mad." Kieran finished grimly, his arms becoming a protective cage around Lyra as she fought to stay conscious through the overwhelming sensory input. Power without balance, without control. But even as fear tried to take hold, Lyra felt something else rising within her. The mate bond with Kieran wasn't just connecting them emotionally, it was creating a stabilizing force, his centuries of alpha discipline and control helping to channel and direct the chaotic energy flooding her system. "No," she said with growing confidence, straightening within his embrace. "They went mad because they were alone, because they had no anchor, no partner strong enough to share the burden." She turned to meet Kieran's silver blue eyes, seeing her own certainty reflected there. "But I'm not alone." The transformation reached its peak in a rush of sensation that left her gasping. When it settled, the world looked completely different. She could see the supernatural signatures of everyone in the room. Damien's vampiric darkness shot through with silver threads of genuine emotion, his lieutenant's more straightforward predatory natures, the complex golden warmth that radiated from every werewolf present. But most clearly of all, she could see Kieran, his alpha power now intertwined with hers in patterns so intricate they seemed to form a language all their own. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly, his hands moving to frame her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "Different," she answered honestly, then smiled as she realized that for the first time in her life she felt complete, powerful, balanced, like I finally understand who I was meant to be. She turned to face Damien, and the pain in his expression almost broke her heart. But beneath that pain, she could now see something else: relief, and a profound, selfless love that had never actually been about possession or control. "You did the right thing," she said softly, the words carrying across the hall with supernatural clarity. "The rejection, the public humiliation, it was cruel and it nearly destroyed me. But if you hadn't done it, I never would have found my way here. I never would have discovered what I really am or found my true mate." "I know," Damien replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've known since the moment I felt our connection sever. The vampire covens will never forgive me for losing you to the werewolves. The political ramifications alone will take decades to resolve. But seeing you now, seeing you complete and powerful and truly happy," he straightened, pulling his lordly composure back around himself like armor, "it was worth every consequence." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring again, but these were different from the earlier warnings. Connor's voice crackled over the intercom, urgent and excited rather than panicked. "Alpha Luna, you need to see this. The transformation energy, it didn't just affect Lyra. It's resonating through the pack bonds, strengthening every werewolf in the territory. And the other packs, they're reporting the same thing. Every allied pack within 500 miles is experiencing a power surge." Kieran and Lyra exchanged glances, understanding passing between them through their bond faster than words could have conveyed it. "The original purpose of the Triarchs," Lyra breathed, "not to be weapons or political tools, but to be catalysts, to strengthen the supernatural communities around them. Which means," Kieran continued, his expression growing thoughtful, "that every faction trying to capture or control you has been approaching this completely wrong. Your power isn't meant to be hoarded or directed from above. It's meant to be shared, to lift up everyone in your sphere of influence." Damien's lieutenant stepped forward hesitantly. "Lord Blackwood, if this is true, if she truly strengthens supernatural abilities rather than threatens them, then the vampire covens made a catastrophic error in judgment," Damien finished, his political mind clearly racing through implications. "And we need to return immediately to begin damage control." He looked at Lyra one final time, his expression soft with memory and regret. "Be happy, Lyra Chen. Be everything I was too afraid to let you become." As the vampires prepared to leave, Kieran pulled Lyra closer, his mouth brushing against her ear as he spoke words meant only for her. "Ready to change the world, Luna?" She looked around the great hall, seeing werewolves kneeling in respect, feeling the surge of strengthened power flowing through pack bonds that now extended far beyond this single territory, knowing that her choice had set in motion changes that would ripple through every supernatural community for generations to come. "With you?" she replied, turning in his arms to meet his kiss with all the passion and certainty of a woman who had finally found her true home. "I'm ready for anything." 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Lyra stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Interspecies Council building, watching the sun set over what had once been neutral territory between vampire and werewolf lands. The building itself was a marvel of supernatural cooperation, vampire architectural elegance blended with werewolf engineering practicality, powered by witchcrafted renewable energy systems, and warded by protective magic that drew from all three traditions. Below her, representatives from dozens of supernatural communities moved through the complex with an ease that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Vampire diplomats worked alongside werewolf strategists. Witch covens shared research with Fey courts. Even the more reclusive supernatural species, shapeshifters, elementals, the ancient ones who rarely emerged from their hidden territories, had sent observers to witness what everyone was calling the New Accord. "Admiring your handiwork?" Kieran's voice carried warmth and pride as he joined her on the deck, 2 cups of coffee in his hands and that smile that still made her pulse race after all these months. "Our handiwork," she corrected, accepting the coffee gratefully and leaning into his solid warmth. "I may have been the catalyst, but this," she gestured at the bustling activity below. "This is what happens when people choose cooperation over conflict." It hadn't been easy. The months following her transformation had been filled with challenges that tested every aspect of their relationship and their political alliance. Vampire covens had initially refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of her bond with Kieran, claiming that her mixed heritage invalidated traditional supernatural law. Werewolf packs had struggled with the concept of a Luna who wasn't born to their ways, and the witch councils had wanted to study her transformation process, convinced they could replicate it to create more bridges between the supernatural species. But the changes her awakening had triggered, couldn't be ignored or suppressed. Pack bonds throughout the werewolf territories had strengthened to unprecedented levels. Vampire covens found their members developing new abilities, enhanced senses and powers they'd never possessed before. Witch magic had become more stable, more powerful, as if some fundamental imbalance in the supernatural world had been corrected. Dr. Santos estimates that supernatural abilities across all species have increased by an average of 30%. Lyra continued, sipping her coffee and watching a group of young werewolves training alongside vampire guards in the courtyard below. And that's just the beginning. The children being born now, hybrid or pure blood, they're all stronger than their parents' generation. The age of isolation is ending, Kieran agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. Your existence proved that the barriers between species were artificial, maintained by fear and prejudice rather than any natural law. A soft chime from Lyra's communication device interrupted their quiet moment. She glanced at the message and smiled, feeling the familiar warm glow that came with good news. The Southeastern Covens just voted to ratify the new accord, she said, showing Kieran the official notice. That makes 47 major supernatural territories in full agreement. Only 3 holdout factions remain, and one of those is showing signs of compromise, Kieran added, his own device chiming with an update from his intelligence network. The European Alliance is sending a full diplomatic delegation next month. They want to see the Interspecies Council in action before making their final decision. Lyra nodded, but her expression grew thoughtful as she considered the implications. Kieran, what do you think would have happened if Damien hadn't rejected me? If I'd stayed with the vampire covens and never awakened my full heritage? It was a question that had haunted her during the early days of their relationship, a source of guilt that had taken months to resolve. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his silver blue eyes distant with consideration. I think the supernatural world would have continued on its path toward open war, he said finally. The tensions were building long before you arrived in my territory. The vampire-werewolf Cold War, the witch councils pulling back into isolation, the smaller species being forced to choose sides in conflicts that had nothing to do with them. Your transformation didn't just awaken new powers. It broke the cycle of mistrust that was tearing our communities apart. Sometimes I wonder if he knew, Lyra mused, thinking of Damien and the sacrifice he'd made in rejecting her so publicly. If some part of him understood that losing me was the only way to save everyone. Does it matter? Kieran asked gently, turning her to face him fully. Whatever his motivations were, whatever cosmic forces might have been at play, the choice you made that night was yours alone. You chose to leave his world behind. You chose to trust me, to bond with me, to become something new rather than something controlled. Before Lyra could respond, the observation deck's doors opened and Connor approached, his expression carrying the kind of barely contained excitement that meant significant news. Alpha, Luna, sorry to interrupt, but you're going to want to see this, he said, tablet in hand displaying what looked like a global map covered in glowing points of light. The monitoring stations are picking up power surges in supernatural populations worldwide, not just in territories that have signed the accord, everywhere. Lyra took the tablet, studying the data with growing amazement. It's spreading. The awakening effect isn't limited to direct contact or proximity. It's somehow propagating through the supernatural genetic network itself. Dr. Santos has a theory about that, Connor continued, pulling up another screen of complex charts and genetic analysis. She thinks your transformation created what she's calling a resonance cascade, that every supernatural being on the planet is slowly awakening dormant aspects of their heritage, becoming more than what their species traditionally allowed. Kieran whistled softly, the sound carrying undertones of awe and concern. A global supernatural evolution. The implications are terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, Lyra finished, handing back the tablet. Connor, start reaching out to our international contacts. If this is happening globally, we need to accelerate the formation of the World Supernatural Council. Every species, every territory, working together to guide this transformation instead of letting it happen chaotically. As Connor hurried away to implement her orders, Lyra found herself thinking about the young vampire-werewolf hybrid who had approached her after yesterday's council session. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, but her abilities were already beyond anything her parents' generation had achieved. She'd thanked Lyra with tears in her eyes, saying that for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a mistake or an abomination, but like a glimpse of what their species could become together. No regrets? Kieran asked, seeming to read her thoughts through their bond. None, Lyra replied without hesitation, then paused as a new thought occurred to her. Well, maybe one. His eyebrows rose in question. I regret that it took a public rejection and a near war to get us here, she said with a smile that held equal parts humor and determination. But I suppose some transformations require dramatic catalyst events. Speaking of transformations, Kieran said, his expression shifting to something softer, more personal. There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, and Lyra's heart stopped completely. I know we're already mated, he said, dropping to one knee right there on the observation deck with the supernatural world's new future spread out below them. I know our bond is deeper and more permanent than any human ceremony could make it, but I want to marry you, Lyra Chen. I want to stand before every species, every faction, every supernatural being who cares to witness and choose you again. Publicly, officially, with all the ceremony and celebration you deserve the first time. As tears blurred her vision, Lyra looked down at the man who had stood beside her through every challenge, who had helped her transform from a rejected, lost soul into the leader of a supernatural revolution. Around them, the Interspecies Council building hummed with activity, living proof that love could indeed change the world. Yes, she whispered, then louder, with all the authority of a Luna Queen whose voice carried across dimensions. Yes, absolutely, yes. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please tell me in the comments which city or country you're listening from. These tales of love conquering impossible odds remind us that sometimes the greatest transformations come from the deepest heartbreaks. As Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger, a unique design that incorporated elements from all three of her heritages, Lyra knew that this was just the beginning. The supernatural world was changing, evolving, becoming something unprecedented and beautiful, and at the center of it all, two souls who had found each other across species lines and political divisions, proving that true love really could reshape the world. The age of separation was ending. The age of unity had begun,